I have been spending a few days thinking about tonight's event, and I thought about what I wanted to share in terms of courageous leaps and big moves. And I thought about 3 lessons, which interestingly for me have characterized both the motivations and some of the setbacks I've had. One is take the risk, even if it hurts or is scary or sends you running. 2 is trusting my intuition, and it's amazing how many times I have to learn that over and over and over. And 3, something I learned from the great Della Smith, it's PR, not ER. After starting my comms and marketing career in Toronto and Vancouver, I moved about 15 years ago to the belly of the beast, Washington, D.C., the other Washington. I moved to the U.S. for love. My partner is American and was then working in D.C. And even though I wanted to make the move, it was incredibly difficult for me to do so because, as it turns out, I'm not really very good with change. I hate it. I resist it. I can't stand it. It's hard. And I just keep doing it over and over again. And that trip and my trip back to the West Coast a couple of years ago marks about my 5th time going back and forth across the North American continent. So that move was really the beginning of my first lesson for you tonight, which is take risks, even if it's scary or it hurts. Moving in my mid-30s, I left what we've heard from a few people left. I think Sharon had a great story. You leave your community, your friends, your family. And for people in our business, leaving your job and the beloved, all-important network is really scary. What happened, though, is that DC opportunity was totally extraordinary. I spent over 10 years there, and I worked at a scale I never could have imagined, with international and national clients with the most extraordinary problems and issues. I discovered that I was a benign bigot, if there actually is something like that, because I moved to America with all the Canadian misperceptions that America is what it markets itself as and not what it actually is, which is a pretty amazing, diverse, and unpredictable place. I got to experience America up close, from incredible events like access to the White House to going to New York for a conference, which is like taking the heli-jet to Victoria, except it's New York. And you get to attract and be around global leaders that only New York can attract. And experiencing America up close during some pretty dark days, like being within the White House perimeter on 9/11, or going to various marches on Washington, or Obama's inaugurations. Pretty amazing stuff. So Ogilvy PR Worldwide was my home for about 10 years. And I really learned there about breakthrough communications and what that means, and how research is the root of everything, but a cool idea doesn't go very far if it's not connected to your audience, and if you have too much research, you run the risk of being completely devoid of creativity. The heart truth that was kindly mentioned with the great run-on of celebrity names, which I have in my own head, was an incredible time and an incredible place with the most extraordinary team. And it reminded me, and reminds me to this day, of how critical your team is. The people that you have around you, that drive you, that motivate you, that keep you real. Some colleagues called the Heart Truth Red Dress a perfect PR storm. We had science, we had news, we had celebrities, we had the marketing clout of the fashion industry, and a first lady, a spokesperson to boot. So it was a lot of fun. It was pretty magical, it was political, it was creative, and it, as I said, heaps of fun with remarkable people. David Ogilvy and a lot of his bon mots really drive a lot of the culture at Ogilvy. And I recommend spending some time looking up what David Ogilvy has to say, because even though it's decades old, it rings very true today. And what he talked about in terms of hiring people, which is what I'm doing here in my new role at SFU, really rings true in terms of building that great team around you. Hire people who are better than you are and leave them to get on with it. Look for people who will aim for the remarkable and not settle for the routine. So one of your speakers last year shared that when things are at their best, sometimes that's the time to make a change. And that leads me to lesson number 2, which is to trust my intuition. When things were going really well at Ogilvy and great in DC, it was time for us to make our way back to the West Coast. So I took the risk of leaving Ogilvy, moving to Seattle, and leaving the corporate sector and going to the nonprofit sector. And I worked for a global health innovation enterprise where I got to travel to Kenya and Ethiopia and to go to places that are completely different from boardrooms and fancy conferences and cool places in New York. And I was struck to our earlier speaker's comment about how people are all the same. This group of incredibly poverty-stricken people living hand to mouth who were running the numbers on their latrine capacity in their village, who had them and who didn't. And as I stood in that really dry, arid field in rural Kenya, I looked around and I thought, this is just not the right fit for me. I'm moved by the work. I'm incredibly amazed at how complex global health is, but I'm not meant to be on the front lines of development. I'm more kind of in the back room, doing the corporate partnerships that drive the mission and bring in the resources, or build the brand with a great team. So I found there that there is such a thing as the right fit, and it's really important to follow your own heart. And as many times as you learn to trust your own intuition, there are times in life where you have to find what your right fit is and follow it. I believe we're all so much happier when we do. Which brings me to my final lesson. It's PR, not ER. I was asked to provide a quote for tonight, and I gave the Rosemary Brown quote. And that's only one of many quotes that reminds me of when things are really tough and you think that it's urgent and you think that it's critical and you think that it's the ultimate. Sometimes it's good to step back, recognize in the eye of eternity, it's not really that important. It's not really that critical. Some of us do work in life and death industries, and it is ER, but most of the time it is PR, and it's hugely valuable and hugely important, and perspective is what we do to support our teams and to support the organizations and missions that we drive forward. So in closing, I wanted to share that I surround myself with optimists, because it turns out I'm really not an optimist at all. I see the glass half full, I worry, I'm neurotic. And when I'm challenged or having one of those dark moments, I anchor myself in thinking about people who are very far away from me, who I may never meet. And it could be imagining one of those women walking down the highways in Kenya, which does happen, with jugs of water on their head that they do every day. Or it could be some incredible political or corporate leader who does something amazing and brave in the face of withering opposition that would send many of us, including me, scurrying to the wine bar. But when I think about those people and I look at what they can do, that gives me strength, that gives me inspiration, and I continue to do what I'm doing. So, in closing, I agree with Dave, who said you all have to make your own way, as we all do. I hope these 3 lessons that have guided me in my journey are helpful to you. Thank you.